Hello and welcome to this special edition of Lynchburg Live. I'm your host, Linda Smith. On November 16th, the United States Services Task Force, an influential group that provides guidance to physicians, insurance companies, and policymakers, announced that it is changing its guidelines for mammography and no longer recommends routine screening for women between the ages of 40 and 49. The recommendations include that women should instead begin routine mammograms at age 50 and repeat the examination every other year as opposed to annually. The task force also recommended that physicians no longer teach patients to do breast self-exams, stating that there's evidence that these exams are instrumental in saving lives. The reasons for recommending these changes, according to the task force, include the fact that overtreatment in the forms of more testing, exams, and some treatments are not always beneficial. And in fact, they say they can harm patients. Mammograms, they contend, can produce false positive results in about 10% of cases, causing anxiety and often leading to unnecessary follow-up tests, sometimes disfiguring biopsies and unneeded treatment. There is also the contention that a number of very small cancers may never grow to maturity or cause problems during the lifetime of a woman. These altered guidelines have caused concern and confusion among women as well as the medical community. The American Cancer Society is recommending continuing with the previous guidelines of mammograms at age 40, annual mammograms, and encourages self-exams. Tonight's Lynchburg Live will address some of those concerns. My guests tonight are Dr. Camille Alexander, who is the Medical Director of Breast Imaging Department at Centra Health. Dr. Ellen DeLuca is in the middle here. Ellen is a PhD, RN, and Associate Professor of Nursing at Lynchburg College. She's also a breast cancer survivor. On the end is Tiffany Howell, a business analyst at Genworth Financial, and she's also a breast cancer survivor diagnosed at the age of 35. And as you know from other shows, I am a one-year breast cancer survivor, and my tumor was detected with a mammogram. We're going to start with Camille. As a breast imager, I think of you as the first line of defense against breast cancer. Can you tell our audience what you do and what a breast imager is?
Well, Linda, I'm a diagnostic radiologist who has done a fellowship, and now I limit my practice to only breast imaging. And I practice with two other dedicated breast imagers here in Lynchburg. And that's quite unusual to have three dedicated breast imagers in a community like Lynchburg. So
I know that what you do, I think you all do it so well, and those of us who have been recipients of your services, certainly appreciate the way you handle your...
Well, I appreciate that.
Ellen, can you tell our audience how you became an advocate for women in the fight against breast cancer? And I understand that you and your students are doing some research on survivorship for the possibility of a book.
Yes, but first I want to tell Camille how great, because I really have been in other places before I came here, and to be able to go to breast imaging and know on the day of the mammogram and the ultrasound in the case of those of us who have had breast cancer and have more specific tests, it's just really wonderful to have a radiologist come and speak with you and tell you, that very same day that this, that this is a normal mammogram, and come back next year and relations, and it's just wonderful. But now on to my story. But I think people should know that this is a great service here we have at Lynchburg. Yes, I became an advocate, I guess, at the time of my diagnosis, maybe right then, but after that, I was 40 when diagnosed, and I did find my own lump, and it was detected on mammogram after, and I did have a lumpectomy, radiation, and chemotherapy, and it took me a few years to recover from that, but after a few years I became a Reach to Recovery volunteer. So I enjoyed speaking with other women about I had a lumpectomy, and frequently they would have chemotherapy and things like that. So I realized need in terms of what people want to hear and the importance of support. So I became interested in the survivorship movement and issues with breast cancer survivors. So I began, investigating a little bit, did a small pilot study, and now I'm involved in a study with Kathy Kennedy, who's a nurse practitioner in radiation oncology, and 2 students of mine who are assisting us. And basically we're interviewing women and asking them, you know, what their experiences have been after the treatment is over. And we're looking at different time frames, for example, like the first 4 years after the diagnosis, and then 5+ years, and then 10 years. So it's been, you know, a good experience, and we're continuing with that. The reason I feel passionate about it is that I, as a breast cancer survivor, 40 years old, after the treatment was over, I was like very lost, you know, to tell you the truth. And that's the same word that the Institute of Medicine used to describe what a lot of cancer patients feel after their treatment is over, you know, having some side effects like hot flashes, going into menopause when I didn't expect it, you know, things like that. And then, again, the existential issues of what do I do with my life now that I'm a cancer survivor and, you know, I may have limited lifespan. So anyway, those are all the things that inspired me, including Patricia Gantz's book on cancer survivorship, and then the Institute of Medicine study, which is a report which you can find on, which is basically talks about from cancer patient to cancer survivor, what the average cancer patient might experience. So.
And Ellen's interviewed me, and I
That's
really
right, and I enjoyed it.
Tiffany, quite young, with a very young family when you were diagnosed. You found your tumor with a breast exam yourself.
I did.
As a survivor, I know you've told me, Tiffany and I are friends, that you want to get the word out about early detection, try to help women as much as you can. What was it like to be diagnosed so young? What kind of impact did that have on you?
It was devastating. I mean, you never expect to hear the words you have cancer in your 30s, especially when you have no family history of any type. So it just really throws you for a loop, and you just don't know what to expect. I mean, it's a whirlwind of emotions and surgeries and decisions you have to make quickly of what you want to do or what's best for you and your family. And I have a bilateral mastectomy and had chemo, radiation, and then I did have reconstruction a year later. But it's a lot of different things you go through. It's very scary, and anything that I do to help others, and I just think it's crazy to not do self-exams.
Me too.
Because I think most people that are diagnosed with breast cancer have no family history. Because that was the biggest shock to me.
Me too.
I always thought, well, my family has cancer, so I don't have to worry about that.
Me too.
And I was wrong.
Well, as we begin our discussion tonight, there's one thing that I wanted to say, and Camille has said the same thing, so I'm going to say it for both of us, and you jump in. I keep applauding Centra Health for bringing innovative cancer treatments and things like the Pearson Cancer Center to our area, and being a breast cancer survivor and having taken advantage of what's offered to you here in Lynchburg, as Ellen said. You know, I just think Centra is to be applauded for that.
Well, I think so as well. When I first came here, or the reason that I brought my family here originally, was because I was convinced that Centra committed to women's health. And I don't think that's changed. In fact, despite these really difficult economic times, and Centra is hurting as well, they have bitten the bullet and are going forward with a new breast imaging center. We're converting to all digital mammography, and you know, this is difficult for them to do, but they have come forward and said they're going right ahead with it. And that should be next year.
I think
it should be
that's
completed
wonderful.
in
Really. I'm interested in all of your first reactions when you heard what these recommendations were from this task force. Ellen?
I was appalled. I really, I read some of the summary of it, and I felt like it was very logical, like just very kind of cold, though. You know, and the idea of looking at lives, not significant, really. And I was even surprised when the guidelines changed. It was 35 at one time, and it changed to 40 later on. My breast cancer was, you know, more than 10 years ago, so I've sort of lived through a lot. But yeah, I felt like it was cold. It was just a sort of